I sat inside the glass-walled executive conference rooms on the 16th floor of Vance Global Logistics, watching the pale winter sunlight reflect off the polished mahogany table. The room was known throughout the enterprise as the Fishbowl, a place where high-stakes contract decisions were finalized and where corporate careers were frequently undone. The air conditioning inside the fishbowl was always set to a frigid temperature, a deliberate corporate design intended to keep visiting vendors uncomfortable and edge executives toward rapid compliance. I adjusted my shirt sleeves, folded my hands across my leather notebook, and looked across the long table at Gavin Vance. Gavin was 28 years old, wore a tailored suit that cost more than my first automobile, and possessed the unearned confidence of someone who had never experienced a single day of actual operational hardship. Sitting directly beside Gavin was a young man named Chadwick, who wore an oversized designer hoodie, sipped an iced coffee, and tapped mindlessly on a tablet computer. Gavin had brought Chadwick into the corporate hierarchy 3 days earlier as his personal chief technology advisor. I was 49 years old and had spent 13 years building, maintaining, and defending the core data architecture of Vance Global Logistics. My job as Systems Infrastructure Director meant ensuring that medical supplies, specialized industrial components, and urgent government cargo moved seamlessly across 34 states without a single moment of data corruption or regulatory non-compliance. Over those 13 years, I had navigated 3 major corporate restructurings, a complex data migration involving 5 million legacy records, and multiple rigorous federal audits. Every line of server architecture was familiar to me, having been built through countless sleepless nights and meticulous design reviews. My chief executive officer, Preston Vance, was currently on a 14-hour non-stop flight across the Pacific Ocean for international trade negotiations in Tokyo. Before stepping onto his corporate aircraft, Preston had temporarily assigned internal administrative oversight to his son Gavin. Gavin had wasted no time asserting his newly granted authority over senior department heads. Eager to demonstrate his decisive leadership style to the board of directors, Jason, Gavin began, resting his manicured hands flat on the polished table and leaning back in his leather executive chair. Thank you for making time to meet with us on short notice. We are initiating a comprehensive operational pivot across all corporate divisions. The company needs lean, cloud-native synergy, and we have concluded that your traditional approach to infrastructure governance is outdated, overly cautious, and unnecessarily restrictive to rapid growth. I looked at him with an unshakable composure that I had honed over decades of high-pressure infrastructure management. What specific performance metric or operational audit are you evaluating to reach that conclusion, Gavin? Chadwick cleared his throat, flicking his fingers across his tablet screen while glancing up with patronizing amusement. The entire legacy software stack is bloated, Jason. You have far too many validation checkpoints, redundant encryption handshakes, and strict access controls. We need a fluid, modern digital architecture. I can streamline the entire system using lightweight automation scripts in less than 48 hours. Streamline, I repeated, keeping my tone perfectly calm, deliberate, and quiet. You are describing our primary security protocol, which protects real-time routing data for hospital supply networks. Those checkpoints exist because federal data protection guidelines require continuous verification of data integrity across all distribution nodes. If a single checkpoint is bypassed, we risk exposing patient supply manifests to regulatory penalties. Furthermore, our military logistics contracts mandate rigorous encryption standard verifications at every junction. Gavin waved his hand dismissively, a small, patronizing smirk playing on his lips. We are not gathered here to debate software methodology, Jason. Effective immediately, your position as Systems Infrastructure Director is terminated. We are transitioning technical leadership to Chadwick. You have 20 minutes to surrender your electronic security card, hand over your master administrative credentials, and vacate the building permanently. 20 minutes. 13 years of 70-hour work weeks, late-night emergency system recoveries, and 0 unscheduled downtime reduced to 20 minutes by a young man who had never configured a single server rack in his entire life. I did not raise my voice, nor did I show a hint of emotional irritation. Corporate executives thrive on emotional outbursts. They use panic to justify their own harshness. Instead, I opened my laptop, accessed the primary administrative console, and executed a clean logout from the master directory. If you are terminating my contract, Gavin, then I am required by company security guidelines to log out of all active administrative sessions immediately. That is completely acceptable, Gavin said, leaning forward. Just write the root passwords for the core database clusters on a notepad before you depart. Beside him, Chadwick nodded eagerly. Yeah, just write them down on a yellow sticky note. That will be totally simple. I looked at Chadwick, then back at Gavin. A sticky note for an infrastructure handling tens of millions of dollars in sensitive daily freight. I closed the lid of my laptop and placed it neatly on the conference table alongside my electronic security badge. Before I walk out that door, Gavin, you need to understand one essential operational detail. The core database network operates under an automated biometric fail-safe mechanism. It requires a physical thumbprint authentication from that primary guarantor every 120 minutes. Your father authorized that security protocol 2 years ago after our extensive federal compliance audit. Gavin laughed, a sharp, arrogant sound that echoed off the glass walls. A biometric handshake? What is this? A Hollywood film? Do not attempt to intimidate us with technical terminology, Jason. We will simply reset the internal admin privileges using master overrides. It is not technical terminology, Gavin. Without the guarantor verification, the validation protocol will register an unauthenticated administrative transition. After 120 minutes, the system assumes a hostile corporate breach. It will initiate an automated lockdown, sever external vendor interfaces, and freeze automated warehouse operations across every regional facility. We have top-tier consultants and full administrative access, Gavin declared, standing up to assert his authority. You are dismissed, Jason. Security officers will ensure you leave the premises without any further delay. I picked up my coat, checked the large wall clock, which read exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, and gave them a subtle nod of farewell. 10 o'clock, Gavin. You have until 12 o'clock noon. Good luck with your synergy goals. I turned on my heel and walked out of the executive fishbowl. I did not slam the door, nor did I glance back at the boardroom table. The fuse was officially lit, and the 2-hour countdown had begun. The walk down the executive corridor was quiet and deliberate. The plush hallway carpet absorbed every footstep, and the ambient hum of the building seemed heavy with unvoiced tension. Employees sat at their cubicles, completely unaware that the central pillar holding their digital workspace together had just been severed. I saw Leon, our sharp 26-year-old junior systems administrator, standing near the main IT bullpen. Leon had worked under my direct supervision for 3 years, learning the intricate mechanics of enterprise network routing, firewall configurations, and database management. He caught my eye, observing the coat folded over my arm and the absence of my security badge. Jason? Leon asked in a low whisper, stepping out into the carpeted aisle with an expression of deep concern. What is occurring on the executive floor? I stopped for a brief moment and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Keep your head down today, Leon. Save all your active local work files. Do not execute any forced override commands if prompted by temporary management, and let the automated system protocols handle themselves cleanly. Remember what I taught you about structural integrity in software environments. When top executives panic, the worst mistake a technician can make is interfering with established automated recovery routines. Leon looked at me with wide eyes, instantly recognizing the profound gravity of my words. He nodded once, understanding the underlying situation without needing further verbal explanation. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the ground floor button, and descended silently. When the polished doors opened into the spacious marble lobby, the security guard on duty offered a friendly wave. I nodded back politely, walked through the glass revolving doors, and stepped out into the crisp February air of the downtown commercial district. Across the broad avenue stood a quiet diner featuring dark wooden booths and the comforting scent of freshly roasted coffee. I walked inside, selected a booth near the front window, where I could view the top floors of the corporate headquarters, and ordered a large cup of black coffee. I pulled my personal tablet computer from my leather briefcase. While I had surrendered my company-issued laptop and security badge, my personal tablet remained connected to a read-only shadow relay network, an alert system I had configured years ago to monitor critical server health metrics during my off hours. It was 10:15 in the morning. Upstairs in the fishbowl, Gavin and Chadwick were undoubtedly sitting in executive chairs, congratulating themselves on modernizing department operations. They had likely ordered expensive catering to celebrate their newly assumed authority. But enterprise servers do not care about executive titles or corporate celebrations. They operate entirely on mathematical logic, strict parameters, and relentless temporal clocks. At 10:20, my tablet computer vibrated softly against the wooden table. A yellow warning icon appeared on the shadow relay dashboard interface. Not net. Scheduled background task authentication failed. System node 4 reporting unverified guarantor timestamp data. I took a slow sip of hot coffee. The first warning light had illuminated on the secondary dashboard. The core system was asking a simple logical question: where is the primary guarantor? In a properly managed technical environment, a qualified administrator would acknowledge the system prompt, provide the required biometric input, and reset the internal timer. But Gavin and Chadwick were not looking at the primary system logs. They were likely browsing enterprise software catalogs, looking for colorful graphic dashboards to present to the board of directors. By 10:45, the tablet computer vibrated again. 2 additional yellow alerts popped up on the display screen. The core load balancing cluster had failed its routine secondary handshake. Because the software had not received the required guarantor confirmation, it began shifting non-essential data traffic away from external interfaces to prevent potential security breaches. Across the street, inside the corporate building, subtle disruptions were beginning to manifest. In the dispatch department on the 9th floor, freight coordinators were noticing slight delays in system responsiveness. Tracking numbers were taking an extra 10 seconds to generate. Database queries were returning soft warning messages. In the IT bullpen, Gavin had called down to demand that Leon reset the root password for the main administrative console. Leon, adhering strictly to my explicit instructions and established operating procedures, politely informed Gavin that root privilege resets required written authorization from the primary guarantor or a formal court mandate. Gavin had reportedly shouted through the receiver, threatening to fire Leon on the spot. Before hanging up in a state of growing irritation, he then instructed Chadwick to execute a manual password overwrite using a custom automation script. Chadwick had brought on a USB drive. When I saw the system alert for an attempted unauthenticated root overwrite at 11:10, I smiled into my coffee cup. Chadwick was attempting to brute force a security architecture designed by defense standard cryptography engineers. The system did not merely reject his script. It immediately escalated the overall threat level from yellow to orange. Threat level escalated to orange. Suspicious administrative activity detected. Isolating external gateway APIs immediately. At 11:15, the external vendor links began shutting down automatically. Vance Global Logistics relied on real-time data, sharing with major freight carriers, port authorities, and regional medical distribution hubs. As the orange threat level took effect, those digital data bridges severed automatically to protect patient data and proprietary shipping manifests. In 4 major regional distribution centers across the country, automated loading docks came to a sudden halt. Scanning units flashed red system errors. Long-haul truck drivers standing at dispatch counters were informed that their digital manifests could not be generated. The physical flow of corporate goods was beginning to congeal, all because an arrogant young executive believed that security protocols were merely optional guidelines. By 11:30 in the morning, the situation inside the headquarters building had escalated from minor technical friction into total operational panic. My personal mobile phone, which was completely separate from my surrendered company line, began to ring. The screen displayed an incoming call from an unlisted number. I answered calmly. "Jason Vance speaking," I said. "Jason, it is Gavin." Gavin's voice was no longer smooth or controlled. It was sharp, panicked, and heavily strained. What did you do to the network? The dispatch terminals are completely frozen, the regional warehouse managers are calling every 2 minutes, and Chadwick cannot log into the primary database server. I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked out the diner window at the 16th floor. I did not do anything to the network, Gavin. As I informed you at 10 o'clock, I logged out of my active session as required by standard contract termination procedures. What you are experiencing is the natural execution of the security fail-safe protocol. Give me the master administrative password right now, Gavin demanded, his breath heavy against the phone speaker. We are losing over $40,000 every 10 minutes that these distribution docks remain offline. There is no text password for the core guarantor lock, Gavin. It requires my physical biometric thumbprint scanned directly at the primary console in the basement server room. It is a physical hardware barrier designed specifically to prevent unauthorized takeover attempts. Then drive back here immediately and scan it, Gavin shouted, abandoning all pretenses of executive decorum. I will pay you for an extra consulting hour at your regular rate. I am no longer an employee of Vance Global Logistics, Gavin. You terminated my contract and instructed security officers to escort me out. Furthermore, entering the secure server room without an active contract or authorized clearance would constitute a violation of federal facility access standards. There was a loud crash on his end of the line, as though a chair had been knocked over in frustration. You are intentionally sabotaging this company. I will have our legal team file an emergency injunction against you immediately. I suggest you review company compliance policy, Section 12 Option Alpha, before calling legal, I replied evenly. Your father signed that agreement to meet federal medical logistics standards. If you attempt to bypass that security standard forcibly, the system is legally mandated to report a critical data breach to federal regulators. Gavin slammed the phone down without another word. 10 minutes later, at 11:45, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the name Lawrence Sterling. Lawrence was the senior managing partner of Sterling & Associates, the external legal counsel that represented Vance Global Logistics on major corporate matters. Jason, Lawrence said, his tone measured and professional. I just received a frantic call from Gavin Vance claiming that you have locked the company out of its operational servers. I am calling to ascertain the factual situation before taking any legal action. Hello, Lawrence, I answered calmly. Gavin terminated my employment at 10 o'clock this morning. Upon termination, I logged out of all active administrative sessions. The core infrastructure is currently running its standard automated guarantor verification protocol. Gavin was explicitly informed that the system requires a biometric verification every 120 minutes. He chose to ignore the warning and attempted an unauthorized root password override, which escalated the threat level. Lawrence remained completely silent for several seconds. Did Gavin attempt an unauthorized override without the primary guarantor present? Yes, Lawrence. And he instructed an external consultant with no security clearance to execute unverified scripts on the primary cluster. I heard Lawrence exhale deeply over the line. Gavin has exposed the firm to immense regulatory liability. Under Section 12 Option Alpha of our federal compliance certification, an unauthorized override attempt on medical supply data triggers a mandatory federal audit if not resolved within 2 hours. That is entirely correct, Lawrence. Thank you for the clarification, Jason. I will advise the board of directors immediately. While Lawrence was dealing with the legal ramifications, the technical clock continued to tick down relentlessly. It was now 11:55. Exactly 5 minutes remained before the final 2-hour window expired. Gavin called me again. This time, his voice was broken, stripped of all arrogance, sounding like a desperate child who had broken a priceless heirloom. Jason, please, Gavin whimpered. The entire warehouse network is completely locked. The regional hospital networks are calling about delayed pharmaceutical shipments. My father's plane lands in Chicago in 30 minutes. If he finds out the entire company is frozen, he will strip me of all corporate authority. Please, what do you want? I will double your previous salary. I will grant whatever consulting fee you request from our corporate accounts. Just come back and scan your thumb. I looked at the wall clock on the diner wall. It read 11:58. It takes 8 minutes to walk from this diner, cross the avenue, clear lobby security, and descend to the basement server room. Gavin. Even if I stepped out the door this very second, I could not reach the console before 12 o'clock. No, Gavin screamed, his voice cracking. No, there has to be a way to pause the timer. You should have listened at 10 o'clock. Gavin. Actions have consequences, especially in systems governance. I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the polished wooden table. At 12 o'clock noon sharp, the final second of the 2-hour countdown expired completely. On my personal tablet computer, the shadow relay display screen transformed entirely. The orange threat level indicators disappeared, replaced by a bold dark crimson banner across the top of the interface screen. Nonit. Guarantor verification period expired. Automated failsafe engaged. Core infrastructure transitioning to complete system lockdown. Across 34 states, the entire digital architecture of Vance Global Logistics went entirely dark. Primary database clusters unmounted their drives and encrypted their file systems. Automated robotic sorting arms in regional fulfillment hubs executed emergency stop routines, lowering their mechanical limbs and freezing in place. Long-distance transport dispatch servers terminated active data sessions, locking truck drivers out of their digital route schedules. The company had not merely experienced a temporary technical glitch, it had effectively ceased to exist as a functional digital enterprise. Inside the corporate headquarters building, the operational consequences were immediate and total. Because the central building management system was linked directly to the core server for security authentication, smart glass panels tinted dark, electronic badge readers went offline, and executive elevator banks defaulted to emergency stationary positions. The entire building atmosphere felt like a fortress that had suddenly lost its electrical heart. I sat quietly in the diner booth, finishing my black coffee and enjoying the absolute stillness. I knew that across the city, emergency alerts were flashing on executive phones and board members were panicking. At 12:20, my mobile phone rang once more. The display screen showed an international satellite number. I recognized it immediately. It was the private line belonging to Chief Executive Officer Preston Vance. I answered promptly. "Good afternoon, Preston Jason." Preston's voice thundered through the speaker, heavy with exhaustion, anger, and deep authority. "I just landed at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. My phone has exploded with 64 frantic messages from board members, hospital logistics directors, and federal compliance monitors. They tell me our entire national logistics network has shut down. What in God's name happened at headquarters?" I remained entirely calm. "Preston, at 10 o'clock this morning, your son Gavin called me into the executive fishbowl. He informed me that my services were no longer required, terminated my employment contract on the spot, and introduced an unqualified consultant named Chadwick to replace me. Before leaving, I explicitly warned Gavin that the core database required a biometric guarantor handshake by 12 o'clock noon under Section 12 Option Alpha. Gavin dismissed the warning, attempted a forced password override, and allowed the automated failsafe to execute. Silence hung on the satellite line for 3 full seconds, a silence far more intimidating than any shouting. Preston was a seasoned executive who had built Vance Global Logistics from a small regional trucking firm into an enterprise giant. He understood technical infrastructure, he understood compliance, and above all, he understood the catastrophic cost of reckless hubris. "Gavin did what?" Preston asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous icy register. "He terminated my contract and attempted an unauthenticated override." Preston took a slow, heavy breath over the line. "Jason, I am turning my corporate aircraft around and flying back to headquarters immediately. I need you to restore the network before federal auditors step into our distribution facilities. Name your terms." I adjusted my posture in the diner booth, speaking clearly and decisively. "My terms are non-negotiable, Preston. First, I will not return as a standard employee under temporary management. I require a 5-year executive contract as Chief Technology Officer with absolute authority over all infrastructure and security decisions. Second, my total compensation will increase by 25%, retroactive to the start of the current fiscal year. Third, Gavin Vance will be stripped of all operational authority over technical departments immediately and permanently barred from entering the server facilities. Fourth, your consultant Chadwick will be escorted off the premises and banned from company property permanently. Done, Preston stated without a single moment of hesitation. Every single condition is granted. I will have Lawrence draft the formal contract and email it to your personal tablet within 10 minutes. Sign it digitally, step back into that building, and bring my company back online. 10 minutes later, a formal executive employment agreement arrived from Lawrence Sterling's legal firm. It contained every condition I had specified, fully articulated in binding legal language. I reviewed the document thoroughly, affixed my digital signature, and sent it back. I stood up, left a generous tip on the diner table, put on my coat, and walked back across the avenue toward headquarters. The corporate battle was over. Now it was time to clean up the wreckage. When I stepped back into the marble lobby of Vance Global Logistics at 12:45, the atmosphere was completely transformed. The turnstiles were frozen shut, emergency lighting cast dim shadows across the floor, and dozens of anxious employees stood grouped near the main entrance. As I walked through the revolving doors, several senior logistics coordinators spotted me. Word had spread rapidly through the building over the past 2 hours. Everyone knew that Gavin had attempted to fire the man who kept the entire enterprise running, and everyone knew that the resulting system collapse was the direct consequence of executive arrogance. As I walked toward the side service door, a spontaneous round of applause broke out among the staff. Dispatchers, accountants, and junior technicians clapped and cheered. I gave them a respectful nod, pulled out my master physical override key, unlocked the security door, and headed down the stairwell to the basement server facilities. The sound of their support confirmed that technical integrity will always earn respect, that executive titles cannot buy. As I reached the basement floor, I encountered Gavin Vance walking out of the executive elevator bank, carrying a small cardboard box containing his personal desk items. His face was pale, his eyes were red, and his posture was completely defeated. His father had called him from the plane 15 minutes earlier, and the conversation had evidently been devastating to his corporate career. Gavin would no longer sit in executive boardrooms or dictate technical policy to seasoned professionals. Gavin stopped when he saw me standing near the server room entrance. He looked at me for a long moment, opened his mouth as if to offer a bitter defense, but realized there was nothing left to say. He lowered his head, walked past me without speaking a word, and exited toward the street. I turned the heavy brass key in the server room lock, pushed open the thick acoustic door, and stepped inside. The basement server room was warm and loud. With the primary cooling systems operating on backup lower power modes, the ambient temperature had risen, and the cooling fans inside the server racks were spinning at maximum speed, producing a high-pitched collective whine. Red and amber warning lights flashed across dozens of server blade arrays. Leon was sitting at the secondary diagnostic terminal, monitoring internal hardware temperatures. When he saw me enter, he stood up instantly, a look of immense relief washing over his face. "Jason," Leon exclaimed. "System temperatures are holding, but the main cluster is 40 seconds away from executing a secondary hard drive thermal purge." I walked straight to the primary control console, pulled out the ergonomic leather chair, and sat down. The main display monitor was dark, displaying a single flashing red prompt: "Critical alert. Secondary hardware purge imminent. Present authorized guarantor biometric authentication immediately." I looked at the small, glass biometric scanner glowing softly beside the keyboard. For 13 years, I had maintained this infrastructure with meticulous care, refusing to compromise on safety, compliance, or professional integrity. Corporate executives like Gavin believed that leadership was defined by title, privilege, and loud declarations in conference rooms. But real authority in a technical enterprise belongs to those who understand how the system actually works, and who have the discipline to protect it. I placed my right thumb firmly against the glowing glass scanner. A bright green light swept across the glass surface, analyzing the physical ridge patterns of my thumbprint. For 0.3 seconds, the screen remained still. Then, a deep, audible chime echoed through the server room, DAC prompt. Biometric authentication confirmed. Primary guarantor, Jason Vance, Chief Technology Officer. Aborting automated purge. Restoring master database clusters. Within seconds, the transformation began. The high-pitched whine of the cooling fans softened as primary HVAC units kicked back on, flooding the room with cold, conditioned air. Row after row of server blades shifted from flashing red to steady amber, and finally to a brilliant, cascading wave of solid green. On my primary console screen, real-time telemetry data began flowing once more. Data report. Database clusters mounted successfully. Vendor API gateways reestablished. Warehouse automation systems online across 34 states. Long-haul routing schedules active. Leon let out a loud shout of triumph, clapping his hands together. We are fully operational across all divisions. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, taking a deep, satisfying breath of the cool air, circulating through the room. My tablet computer vibrated on the desk beside me. A short text message had arrived from CEO Preston Vance. Thank you, Jason. Welcome to the executive team. I smiled softly, closed the tablet lid, and looked out at the long rows of green lights glowing in the cool darkness of the server room. The blackout was over, the system was secure, and authority had finally returned to where it belonged.